Hello and welcome back to the Living with Lost podcast. Today, I'm joined by an amazing guy. I found him on Instagram. He released a really amazing article, and I just felt like he was perfect guy to interview for the podcast. So thank you for joining me, Joe Clark. I'm looking forward to a very nice chat today. How are you doing, mate?
I'm good. No, thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to it. And I've been having a lot of conversations recently about the
Yeah.
article and the changes that I'm trying to make to like the mental health system in general and conversations about mental health. So yeah, it's a privilege to be on.
So one of the things I do want to start off by asking, in respect to your article, and what was your reasoning? Like how did you decide this is what you want to do? Like how did this come to fruition, sort of thing?
Sure. So um for those who don't know, I made a suicide attempt nearly 2 years ago now. Um I think I made it on May the 29th. My 18th birthday was on May the 22nd. So yeah, I made a suicide attempt then. Survived. Bit of a miracle that I survived, really. Um, Kind of went through a process of recovery. Uh, Not, it wasn't instant. I had to work at it to make sure that
Yeah.
I was totally okay. Uh, and I'm in a place now where I've been for like almost a year, just enjoying life. I had a
Yeah.
full-time job last year. I've been at university this year, making friends, just taking one day at a time, like enjoying life for what it is. And to be honest, it's taught me that the way I was feeling at that point when I made the suicide attempt, it wasn't permanent.
Yeah.
People can change over time, and I wanted to show that to others, to
Yeah.
prove that suicide shouldn't be the answer, shouldn't be the route that they go down.
Yeah.
Um, because it's not just about how it affected me; it's about how it affected the people around me as
Yeah. Of
well.
course. Of course.
Uh,
Um,
and
Sorry,
yeah,
can I just jump in there? So one thing so obviously the kind of conversations I have, I talk about, loss and how, people have lost someone to suicide or whatever it is. But do you find talking about suicide with other people, do you notice, like, is there an uncomfortability there, or, um, as in, like, it is a very difficult conversation, and I feel
yeah.
like not everyone, um, is mentally prepared to have that conversation, sort of thing. So how have you kind of dealt with that, in your recovery, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. To be honest, when it first happened, uh, for like the lot before I released the article, I'd say only about 20 people knew about my attempt.
Okay.
So that includes family,
Yeah.
like 7 of my close mates. And then obviously you've got everyone who was caring for me and looking after
Of
me,
course. Of
but it
course.
wasn't out in the open.
No.
Despite it being reported in like local newspapers, people didn't know it was me because it was like obviously anonymous.
Yeah.
Um, and then I put the article out. Well, firstly, I did tell a couple of mates at uni because I was close with them.
Of
And
course.
to be honest, I do feel like even though it doesn't define me, the suicide attempt, it is still a big part of the person that I've become.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
Because I've learned a lot from it. Um, when I put the article out, that was when it was put into the mainstream that yes, I made a suicide attempt. Most people were shocked because they don't see me as the kind of
Yeah.
person
Of course.
to make a suicide attempt. Um, which is interesting because then you ask the question, well, who is the kind of person to make a
Yeah.
suicide attempt? Which I think slowly people are learning that there isn't a type of person.
No.
Uh, but honestly, I don't drink at uni because of the meds that I'm on. And I
Yeah.
often
Of
say to
course.
people, it's just mental health stuff. And I haven't had a single bad response to that. I feel like we're making progress in terms of the discussions that we're having because everyone just says, fair enough. You don't
Yeah.
even have to tell me anymore. If you're doing it for your mental health, I don't need to know the medication that you're on. I don't need to know what condition you're struggling with. Like, perfectly fine. Like, you do you.
Yeah.
If it makes you happy, makes you feel better in yourself, then that's totally cool. So the response to my mental health struggles and to my suicide attempt has been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, I mean, I do. There's a lot of things you touched on, but I think before we dive into them, I think to give like a broader idea of kind of your suicide attempt, if you don't mind, to sort of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I say, it was almost 2 years ago now. I went to like my local train station and jumped in front of a train. But there's like a glass window at the front of the
Yeah.
train, and I basically hit through that, which meant that I ended up in like the driver's compartment of the train
Yeah.
rather than kind of, well, having a serious injury
Yeah.
or killing myself as I was intending to do. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, all I came away with was like a scar on my arm. That's the only
Okay.
like long lasting thing.
Yeah.
There was no like brain damage, no significant injuries at all, nothing life changing or life threatening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I made the attempt, which I obviously now completely regret.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I was in a hospital for a week afterwards just to help me recover slightly because I did fracture my jaw, but that's totally fine
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Of course.
Um, and I did have like a small brain bleed, but it's nothing that was like long lasting at all.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I
I
was
mean, which
in
is incredible, remarkable, isn't it?
yeah, no, honestly, sometimes I have to pinch myself
Yeah.
as to like why it happened to me, because one of the paramedics who was like at the station when it happened, she said that she'd been working for 27 years and she'd been there when a few people had jumped in front of a train, and in the 27 years she'd never seen anyone come away with no injuries like that.
Yeah.
um and it is staggering because, yeah, I mean, I'll always be grateful for it. It's always something that um I'll look back on and think, just you need to make the most of the life you've got now,
Yeah.
whatever happens, like good and bad.
Of
Because
course.
I mean, I feel like in a way I've been given a second chance.
Yeah. A little bit about your mindset, and I know what it's like to be in a dark place, and losing a parent. You develop a certain grief where there is a lack of rationality in your thought process. But when you're in this dark place, and I think this is something a lot of people do really need to understand, is how difficult it is to really converse what is going on in your life, and really talk about. I mean, conversations like this are incredibly powerful, but they're not easy. They're not something that someone can just automatically develop. So my well, it's less of a question, it's more of that period of time where you were extremely low, and your mind sort of pulled you towards suicide. What was kind of going through, what were the thoughts you were having?
Yeah, sure. So you hear a lot that people make the argument that kind of suicide's selfish,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to call them stupid for that,
No.
because you can see why, because of
Yeah.
the pain that you cause to
I mean, it's
others.
an
And
inconsiderate thing to say.
yeah, no, I was going to say that it's kind of naive in a way.
Yeah.
um you could say ignorant, but I wouldn't say it's incomprehensible why they're
Yeah.
saying that, because you can see the impact that it has on the people that they leave behind.
Yes.
um but at the same time, I totally disagree that it's selfish, because at that point I convinced myself that the people around me, um the people who knew me, would be better off without me. I was almost a
Yeah.
burden on them. A few days before I made my suicide attempt, I actually walked out of an A-level exam, and
Okay.
I'm quite academic, and I just couldn't get over the guilt that I was feeling. Like, my parents have like raised me to be like a smart kid, um, and not even my parents, just my teachers as well, my
Yeah. Yeah. Of
friends. Like,
course.
they want to see me do well. I felt like I'd not only just let myself down, but just let everyone that I knew down as well. Um, so yeah, it was, the pressure of A levels was like the final straw.
Okay.
Um, and it was in the half-term break between my A level exams that I made the attempt. And I remember just trying to revise on the morning of my attempt, of the day of my
Yeah.
attempt. I couldn't. I was
Yeah. Of
honestly,
course.
I felt like I was absolutely locked in my thoughts. Like, I was trying to put pen to paper, type on my laptop, and the thoughts just weren't coming together. Um, I was just non-stop calling helplines,
Okay.
uh, but I just couldn't see a way out. I
Yeah.
couldn't see a way out at all, because no one had
Yeah.
ever told me that other people felt this way as well.
Yes. Yes, I understand.
So you convince yourself that no one in the history of humankind has felt as crap as you do in that moment.
Yes, totally.
So, and then it gets to a point where you're just like, I need to escape this. Yes, there's good aspects of my life, but the bad aspects, sometimes they just feel inescapable. Um, and that was what led to my attempts. And I think A-level exams were like the final straw,
Yeah.
because I just felt underprepared for them. I would put too much pressure on myself. I just felt like I had to get away from them. And I was always just low in confidence in myself. Um, so I just felt like I kind of had to get away from myself and escape from the hurt that I was feeling.
Yes.
And that's really what led up to it.
It's interesting that the idea, you mentioned how you did have good thoughts, but it's almost like the negative thoughts just drown them out to the point where that is all you can see. Like you're in a room of darkness almost. I have suffered with mental health in the past, and I've never had suicidal thoughts, but I know what it's like to be in a position where this idea of this lacking in confidence, which is horrible. It's a feeling where you, like you said, it's like a never ending battle of self doubt. Just and it's so difficult to, and I think coming back to the idea of when someone says suicide selfish, and I think unless you've really experienced the idea of mental health and know to the point where you can fully comprehend how someone was feeling at their lowest point in time, you can't really, like, it doesn't really make sense why someone would want to commit suicide. But when
Mm.
you have experienced mental health and you know the struggles that come with it, it's something that suicide isn't something that people want to do. It's to escape the pain of everyday life almost. How so in your journey, how, so initially after your your attempt, and I don't really like the term attempt. Like, I don't know, you don't it, I just feel like it has such a negative connotation. It's not, when you don't attempt to kill, like, you're just in such a low point in your
Yeah.
life where that feels like the only option. um
Mm.
but at this time, do you, like, I feel like I know the answer, but would any of your friends or peers known what you were experiencing and known, like, what was going through your mind, sort of thing?
Um, I mean, uh, my close mates knew that I was struggling,
Yeah.
but nowhere near the extent to the point that they thought that I would ever make a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
So they knew that I struggled with like exam stress, that I wasn't the most confident. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, he's probably just got a little bit of anxiety. Um,
Mm.
my close family, we were the same in that they knew that I was suicidal, but one, they didn't know
Yeah.
how to respond, and two, um, they didn't. We all never thought that I would actually go and make a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
Uh, I never thought that I would. It
Yeah.
was just on that in that particular moment, like the weight of like my thoughts were so heavy that I just felt like I couldn't really get past them.
Yeah.
Uh, so to summarize, my friends and family wouldn't have known that I was suicide. That well, they wouldn't have thought that I would ever make a suicide attempt.
Yes.
Especially my close friends, they just thought, oh, he's a little bit anxious some of the time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't want to say it sounded like a spontaneous decision, but from the how you sort of said you were working in the morning, um, was when what was like the turning point where you decided that, like, this is kind of it. I'm just not happy. Um,
Yeah. Um, when I say like A levels with a trigger point, it really was just a trigger because it had been
Yeah.
building, the mental health struggle been building from the time I was like 13, 14. Like struggling with like low
Yeah,
self-confidence,
of course.
exams, like friendship groups. So it'd been building from that point. But I think the point where, I mean, it's difficult to say that there's a specific point where you
Yeah,
think,
there
oh
is.
yeah,
Yeah, of course.
now's the time. But I
It was like
knew,
a graduation of a constant battle and things building on
yeah,
top of each other. And then, I understand there wasn't a turning point, so to speak.
yeah. I mean, there probably was an instance where I was like, yeah, you've got to do this now. And if I had to say, I'd probably have said that was a couple of seconds before, um, when I actually decided to jump.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, it's important to emphasize that it was like suicide. Very few suicides are spontaneous events. Like
Yeah.
you'll see a build up over time, and I was exactly like that.
Okay. And so the thing I want to ask, you were speaking a lot about, and I think growing up, when you're a young guy in school, and this is definitely something I experienced. The idea of, when you're lacking in confidence and lacking in self-confidence, especially at such a young age for a guy, I found personally that I didn't know how to discuss it, and in my naive mindset, a bloke isn't supposed to have any emotional, and supposed to have any emotions, and you're supposed to be stoic and just, lads banter constantly, but in
Yeah.
reality that isn't the case. And I think especially in school it's quite a daunting place. People don't actually realize the mental struggle people go through. And you know there were definitely periods when I was in school, and I feel like the school system, there needs to be an element of sort of addressing, tackling these things, and putting more of a significance behind mental health, especially in school, because it's a point where you are significantly transitioning. You're developing, emotionally, physically, um and you kind of need to understand what is going on in your life, and you need to understand how these emotions will develop. And it was
Mhm.
definitely a point in my life, when I was 13, 14, where I just had absolutely that my self-esteem was like rock bottom,
Mhm.
to the point where there was no reason for it to be. I just had no one telling me it was normal to feel that way. And it was I wouldn't say normal, but it's I wasn't, like you said, you're not a set in stone case, but it
Mhm.
almost feels like that, you know
Yeah, yeah. No, it does. And one of the things I learned was that we kind of have beliefs about ourselves. And I learned
yeah
this through CBT, which was like probably the most crucial element to my recovery. But you have like these beliefs about yourself. And whenever you, so say, you come up with a belief that, like, or I would say, like, oh, I'm an ugly person.
yeah
And then whenever someone says something to contradict that, they might say, oh, like, oh, your hair looks nice today. You kind of dismiss it. Whereas if someone was to say, oh, actually, like, you're not looking too great today, that would really impact on you. So
yeah
everything that supports that belief, you hold on to,
yeah of course.
and that really bothers you, and you take it under your skin. And everything that contradicts it, you kind of brush it off. It's like water off a duck's back.
Yeah
Um, it and it's interesting because when you start to note your thoughts and you're more aware of the process that you're going through, when you're linking the thoughts to your underlying beliefs, then you start to see that process actually happening.
yes
Um,
of course.
and once I'd had CBT, I started to do that, and that's when things really started to shift, like in my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah,
And I realized that I could start changing my thoughts, and then that would start impacting on my behavior, my emotions, and just like my general life, like my
yeah, of
mood and
course.
how happy I was feeling.
I think also, like, in terms of changing your thoughts, it's important to really consider that, you know, you don't snap out of mental health, and you don't become less anxious. It's just about acknowledging and really understanding that, yes, this is a negative thought. It's temporarily here. You know, and it's about managing those thoughts when they are here. It's, you know, they don't go away. I think, you know, it's 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 something, you know, I don't know the statistics, how many people experience mental health, but I think to really the one you know, word of advice I would give to people who don't know what it's like is, it's not something that really escapes, but you learn how to deal with it.
Mm,
um and it's much like grief in my respect, how I've learnt, you know, the grief of losing a parent. You know, it never escapes. It's something that will always be there, but you learn how to move on, and you learn how to, well, like, the podcast title, learn how to live with loss, and you know, you learn how to live with these negative thoughts. I mean, one thing what you said was actually quite interesting, and I haven't actually considered it before, but I don't know if this is a mental health thing, but, you know, if someone was complimenting you, like you said, you know, I almost kind of dismiss confident. Like, let's just say someone was, saying, admiring my, oh, you looking really good, mate, or whatever it is. Like,
mm,
it's not something I really consider. Like, I could get 1,000 people complimenting me, but the one person, the one time, it's like a negative, something negative, like, oh, sorry, mate, I didn't really like your last interview, or, mate,
mm.
you know, what you wrote, I didn't really agree with. I kind of get so fixated on the negative aspect, even if, you know, I've had a million, 1,000 positive responses, but the one time it's a negative response, you become, you know, it's like you have like tunnel vision, and that is all you can think about.
Mm.
Um, is would you like how would you sort of describe your mindset when you have those thoughts? Not necessarily in that manner, but like, how would you sort of these negative thoughts that you have, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, before the attempt, it would have kind of been, so say I was thinking, oh, I haven't revised, I didn't revise enough for this exam. Um, and my teacher gives me a really good mark, but she leaves me a comment saying, oh, you could have done this better.
Yeah,
Your mind is automatically drawn to the point, of you could have done this better, rather than thinking
yeah,
you got a good mark. Whereas now at uni, if I was to get, because my belief has changed from you need to do better to try to do better.
yeah.
Don't put yourself, change the wording of your thoughts. Don't put yourself under so much
Yes,
pressure.
yes, totally.
Um, so just be your own, not be your own best friend. That's a bit cringy, but like just speak to yourself as you would speak to a friend. That's a better way
Yes,
of
mate. I
putting it.
was honestly, I was literally about to
Yeah,
say that. Spot
yeah,
on.
yeah. That's the important thing that I learned, because you always speak to other people in a nicer way than you speak to yourself.
Of
That's why
course.
people make jokes about, oh, I'm really good at giving life advice, but my life's a mess. It's
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you speak better to other people, or at least it works with me, and I assume it works with others. You speak better to other people about their problems than you do with your own, because you're harder on yourself and you blame yourself more than you blame others.
Why do you think that? Why do you? It's interesting, but yeah, like, why do we do that?
I don't know. Uh, and I think it comes down to the fact that there's a kind of a spectrum of how much you do it.
Yeah,
And before my attempt, I would have been way over on the spectrum of I don't talk to myself like I would talk to a friend at all. So if a
no.
friend came to me and said, "Oh, I've been struggling with my grades. Do you think it's my fault?" Then I would say, "No, it's not your fault. Maybe it's your teacher.
Yes.
Maybe you're studying too much." Like, I would think of kind of the positives from it, or just say, "Oh,
Yeah.
you haven't got a nice working space. You shouldn't blame yourself for that." Whereas if I was struggling with my grades before the attempt, then I would say to myself, "Oh, you need to do more. It's not down to the teachers. It's down to what you put in. You haven't been handing in your homework on time." Uh, Whereas now, I try to stop myself, from saying those kind of things. And it all comes down to challenging your thoughts.
Yes.
So if I was to start blaming myself, then I would think, you know what, let's actually weigh up the evidence and thinking a way where you problem solve rather than coping emotionally. So emotional coping would be, oh, I'm really angry with myself, I should have done more. Whereas problem solving is actually thinking, could I have done more? Is that really rational? Did I have time?
Yeah.
And you kind of take a moment to appreciate that you're only human and there's only so much you can do, and you
Yeah.
don't have to constantly blame yourself for everything negative that happens to you.
Yeah. I think, the moral is, you kind of treat yourself how you would treat others. And, I think what you were mentioning before, and really analyzing your negative thoughts. I mean, I've definitely found that to be incredibly beneficial. And, in the sense, when you have an irrational thought, whatever that may be, I'm a bit of a writer. So like, I like to write down, all the shit that goes on up here. I've really found it's extremely beneficial for me to just write it all out on paper, and then I read it back, and I'm like, this is horrible. Like, why am I thinking in this manner? Like, there are
Yeah.
so many things I can be happy about. And I read it back, and I almost like cross it out, like just sort of like eradicate those, those thoughts. And I've personally found that to be particularly beneficial.
Yeah, so that would be what you're doing there. From what I learned from CBT is what I've tried to implement. It's that idea of don't cope emotionally, but cope via problem solving.
Yes,
So
yeah,
if you were going
yes.
to cope emotionally, you would just let those thoughts bubble away in your head, and you would like just react to them or behave on them. So and that's when, so say, oh, I did rubbish on an exam. You might just kind of beat yourself up about it. Whereas if you actually break down the reasons why it is that you might have struggled, then you'll see that you did all you could and you can take
Yes.
the positives out of it.
Yeah.
So it's all about challenging your thoughts rationally rather than just reacting to them immediately.
Yes.
Because something I've learned is that you can lie to yourself quite easily. And it's just about seeing through the lies a lot of the time.
Okay. So what would you mean by you can lie to yourself quite easily?
I mean, I used to lie to myself a lot. So growing up, um, I was always good at running. Uh, I was like county champion.
Okay, little
In
flex
like,
here.
yeah, of course. I was like county champion in year 8.
What was your 5K
And
time?
5K time,
Yeah.
16:31.
No. That is incredible.
That was, to
What?
be fair, that was 3 years ago. And since then, obviously, I've been going through some stuff, so I haven't been training.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm hoping to get back into it next year at university.
Do you know
When
what? When I was 14, I did the did you ever do the Virgin Mini Marathon?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah?
yeah,
Yeah, I did that was it when I think it was 2014?
yeah. No, it's class.
Yeah, I
I was
mean, I
probably
can't
there
say
as
my
well.
time was anything like yours, mate. I did like, it was like, honestly, I was gassing. Mine was probably like 19, no, I think it was 18:45, and that was like the best I ever got in my
That's still
fitness.
really good though. I know that
Yeah.
probably sounds patronizing, but that is
No,
actually
it's not. It's just, honestly though, now, mate, I'm so unfit. My best time is probably like 28. It's
yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah. No, I've lost a bit of fitness, but I'm hoping to get back into it next year.
Yeah.
Just because training this year has been a shambles. I've been injured, and obviously uni training hasn't been able to go ahead because of
Okay.
COVID. So I'm looking forward to getting back to it next year. Um, but
Do
going
you,
back to what I was saying,
yeah.
uh, about running, and how I used to lie to myself. So
Yeah.
say um, I would finish a race and I would blame myself for everything. I would say, "Oh, you should have trained more. You should have worked harder. It's your fault you didn't do more." Whereas, really, okay, it's not lying to
Yeah.
yourself, but it's making yourself believe
Perspective change.
the
Yeah.
negatives.
Yeah.
So rather than thinking, "Oh, uh, you should have trained more," you could think, "You know what? You couldn't have really done much more. Like,
Mm.
there's only so much you can do."
Yeah.
Um, And also another example is people, it's just the idea of low self-esteem again, where you don't feel comfortable in your appearance and you
Yeah.
lie to yourself. You say, you don't, again, not really lying to yourself, but it's that perspective shift again, as you say. And you focus on all the negative elements of your appearance and you generalize that to say, I never look good.
Yeah.
When in reality, no one is ugly as such. Someone's just decided that.
Yeah.
Once you can't objectively say that someone's ugly, but for some reason I decided that I was an ugly person.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, well, I mean, I'm not saying that like, oh, I'm the best looking guy around,
Well,
but
you are. You're pretty decent, mate.
at least I can appreciate that like it's all subjective
Yeah.
and you can't, no one will agree 100% that not everyone on the planet, there won't be a single person where everyone would agree that they're attractive.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just that idea. I'm kind of suggesting that idea that it's all about perspective because their subjective matters and they should be thought of subjectively rather than objectively. There's no
Yeah.
definite answer to them.
No, 1000%. Definitely in terms of the anxiety and the negative thoughts you felt. Do you find because from what I'm kind of understanding, a lot of that was, you know, putting this pressure on yourself to succeed and to be, you know, the best version of yourself, which I don't really know what that means, but like, did you, because yeah, so is that something you kind of felt, that the idea of putting this pressure on yourself was making you feel that much worse?
Yeah, there's this term that's used to describe some young people and even uh, slightly older people who struggle with their mental health occasionally. It's called like high achieving perfectionists.
Okay.
It's like, so I won't lie, I did achieve well in terms of academics and
Yeah.
sports.
Yeah.
Um, like I was always at the top of my year, really, or like among the best students and among the best athletes. But it's that idea of perfectionism, whereas it's so you should always be striving for more rather than accepting what you already have. So if you get a B
Yeah.
grade, you think, oh, I should have got an A, rather than thinking, oh, at least I can get a C.
Yeah.
So it's, and when you actually think about it, there's no such thing as perfection.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. Like there's, you look at a piece of art, you look at a sporting event, there's no such thing as a perfect moment.
No.
Um, it's just this idea that we attribute to specific events when they go really well. Um,
Yeah.
so if you're constantly striving for perfection when perfection doesn't actually exist,
You'll never be
then
happy.
you're constantly beating yourself up,
Yeah.
constantly. And that's what I was doing. Um, it was never, I never had enough. I was never doing enough. I'd never achieved enough.
Yeah.
It was always wanting something more rather than
Yeah.
giving myself a pat on the back and saying, well done. Like you've done enough there. You've played your part.
Yeah.
Um, and now I'm not going to lie. I still want to achieve things. I still want to get a good degree. I still want to do things in my running. Um, but it's about that perspective. I'll train and I'll say, you know what, that was a great training session, rather than thinking, oh, my times could have been quicker. But again, I'm talking a lot about perspective and shifting that because ultimately that's what it comes down to. For me, a lot of people who struggle with their mental health, it may well be something to do with their environment that's been affecting them.
Yeah.
Uh, so they might be suffering abuse, or it might be something uh, slightly less tragic than that. It might just be they've got bad friendship groups, or they feel like they're not achieving at school. Whereas for me, um, if I actually look back at that time, there wasn't much I could complain about.
No.
Ultimately, it all boiled down to the idea of shifting my perspective because I was at a good school. I was doing well with my running. I had amazing friends, like a loving family, lived in a good house. And you look at it and you think, well, what else do you want? And it
Yeah.
ultimately it came down to that idea of appreciating things rather than constantly striving for more. But
Yes.
I would just add that's an important idea, because ultimately people who suffer with depression, when they have more, often it makes their depression worse because they blame
Yeah.
themselves. They say, oh, well, if you've got
Yes.
all these things, then why aren't you happy?
Yeah.
Um,
Most definitely.
but yeah,
Um,
again, that comes down to perspective shift.
yeah. I mean, there's definitely a few things that, what you said that I do find very interesting. I mean, I played football at quite a high level when I was younger. I played for QPR, and one of the things as this idea of what was it, high performance perfectionism, or
Yeah, high
I,
achieving perfectionism. That's
okay,
the term
and
that's often used.
I was never satisfied with how I played. I could have had the most amazing game of my life, and yet I still wanted to do more. I still felt, that I was missing something. And, like you touched upon, there is no that this in reality, there is no, there's no perfect outcome. You always want more. You always want to continuously better what you've done. And having that mindset at 14, 13, when you're playing football, or whether you're running at a high level, you put it takes the love also, which is, it takes the love out of something you should
Yeah,
enjoy. Football for me was something I was incredibly passionate about, and yet I didn't enjoy it because I was my own worst enemy. I was, before going to training, I would get nervous. After training, I would beat myself up for the small passing errors I made, or on match days, if I took like if I lost the ball X, Y, and Z amount of times. And I was never satisfied. And something I've realized, quite recently, nowadays I'm not playing at that level. I'm playing with my mates on Sundays, and I just enjoy that so much more because I've taken that the idea of that pressure, and now I'm not looking at my performance, and I'm not evaluating every single mistake I make, and I'm just doing an activity because I enjoy it, and I'm making the most of that activity.
mm,
And I think, when you do play any kind of sport at a high level, and I think, I assume this is something you can relate to. It feels more like a job than
yeah,
than than something that is pleasurable. And I've kind of learned now, especially with sport, because one of the things that benefits my recovery, in grief and in mental health, has been the idea of exercise. And you can't, it's quite conflicting if exercise, is your the key to your recovery, and yet you're putting this pressure on yourself to perform. It's like it doesn't, it's not a puzzle, it doesn't connect. So for me, it's
yeah,
always been about just enjoying whatever it is you do. And this idea, this illusion of perfectionism and trying to reach standards that, you know it doesn't mean that you can't be a success in whatever you do. You
mm,
can still do wonderful things, like get an amazing degree, or find an amazing girlfriend, or whatever it is. You can still succeed in whatever aspect of your life. I think just taking that element off
mm.
off off your daily activities, and shifting your perspective, just makes your life, in a way, changing your thoughts. It really opens your eyes in a way.
Yeah, no, totally. And it got to the point when I was training during my GCSEs and also during my A levels, where I would go down to the track, and training almost became a chore. Like I almost added it to my to-do list,
Yeah,
as if it was something that I had to tick off at the end of the day
yeah,
each time I did it, rather
yeah,
than just going there, being in the moment, forgetting about work for a bit, and just enjoying it for what it
yeah.
was. Because I often felt like I was rushing back from training so that I could do a bit of revision before bed. And it
Oh,
was
yeah,
always like, oh, looking at your watch, like, how much time do I have? Whereas now it's just like, uh, some things are more important than studying. And
yeah,
also, if even when I'm studying now, I'll make time to go for a run, because it's
yeah.
actually beneficial in the long
Yes, of
term to my
course.
studying. Because you get that breather, you get that fresh air, whatever you want to
Yeah,
call it. It's like the heart racing. Um, and it's positive for you, and it's better to go out and do that than constantly be thinking, oh, I should be working, I should be working. It's better to
Yeah.
actually take a proper break, because that'll help your mental health in the long term, which of course, if your mental health's good, then you're going to be studying better as well.
Yeah, of course. Slight change in conversation. How have how has your mental health been at uni? I mean, you're first year, aren't you?
Yeah.
So this has obviously been quite a challenging year for everyone, but you know, for university, my brother's first year of uni, and as a university student, you know, in the midst of a pandemic, has that been a challenge, or have you just kind of with your CBT kind of hand managed it?
I think I've managed it pretty well, to be honest.
Yeah,
Um, I had a job over my gap year, and I was actually considering staying there for another year because of the pandemic. Um, because I thought that I would enjoy my uni experience more if I held back another year. But I decided not to. I decided to go to uni. And I went into it with the mindset of it's probably not going to be the best year to go, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a good time. You can't
yeah,
try and make the most of it. Um, Whereas I think some students would have gone into it being like, oh, it's uni, it's the best time of your life. Like you've got to make the most of it, whatever. And if you're unhappy for a single second, then it means that you're wasting time there. Because let's be real, you're told the whole time, like even for your teenagers, oh, university is the best time of your life,
yeah,
which automatically means that if you're not enjoying it, then you've done something wrong. Um, but I tried to shift that. My parents always also said to me, like, don't be hard on yourself if you're not enjoying it to begin with.
yeah,
Um, but thankfully, uh, I've had a great time. I've really enjoyed it. I've managed to make some friends, like despite Corona, when pubs were
yeah,
actually open and we were socializing properly.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I've really enjoyed it. There hasn't really been a day there where I've thought, oh, this is a bit crap. Obviously, online learning isn't ideal, but that's another
yeah,
thing. You just have to make the best of it. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, my mental health has been good, to be honest. Uh, and yeah, I've enjoyed the uni experience so far, and hopefully in term 3 and second year things will open up more and it can be more of like a normal uni experience
yeah.
too.
No, I'm glad, mate. I'm glad. I mean, it's one of the things, you know, I wouldn't say I found uni challenging. I in uni, I'm a second year student, and you know, I haven't, you know, I wouldn't say mentally it's been challenging, but when I lost mum, so I lost mum at the end of you know, no October 2019. So I was just in my second year, and when, you know, once you experience a loss, your mental health, your grief, especially whilst at uni, I found it to be incredibly challenging. It was, you know, there was a lack of just, I felt there wasn't a safety, and you know, I was putting myself in positions, you know, no student really, you know, when you're when you, and I think this kind of links with the idea of, you know, of alcohol and drinking and, you know, drugs, you know, especially when you are low and you have this mindset and these thoughts. Alcohol is not your best friend. Like it's
Mm.
like it's there to fucking, you know, it's a depressant. You know, it's something
Yeah,
so
yeah.
toxic. And you know, I definitely, even there were periods where, you know, I might have gone to the pub and had a, you know, beer with the boys, but
Yeah.
that, and it's not, you know, even something as small as that would have caused
Mm.
a come down. And you know, I still drink, but I think the days of me getting absolutely shit faced are no longer, because you know, I think it's one of those things where you understand what is the key to your happiness and the key to your mental health. And
Mm.
you know, yes, alcohol might be something that, you know, it lowers your guard, and you know, you might have a better time, but in the grand scheme of things, for me anyway, it was having like the reverse effect. So I've kind of cut that a bit out my life.
Yeah.
What's your kind of reasoning for not drinking as much, or not at all? You said, you know.
So I don't drink at all. Uh, that's because of the meds that I'm on. So I'm on like lithium, which is a treatment for like often a treatment for bipolar disorder because it treats like mood swings and it's a mood stabilizer. And there's quite bad side effects where if you do drink a lot and you don't like stay hydrated, then it can like be really dangerous.
Yeah.
Like my psychiatrist did say, oh, you can have one small drink, but it's one of those things where it's best to steer clear of it. Because obviously we all know once you have one, then you're more likely to have a few more. And also it is a depressant. And it's that idea that I'm on meds for my mental health. Alcohol is a drug. Do I really want to be taking meds for my mental health and also be drinking alcohol,
Yeah.
which is a depressant, when I'm on antidepressants?
Yeah.
It just doesn't really make
It's
sense.
yeah. No,
Um,
I understand that.
so it's all about balance.
It's about finding your balance and fine tuning kind of
Yeah, exactly.
your
And
what
the
works for
benefits,
you.
yeah, the benefits for me of not drinking massively outweigh the benefits of drinking.
Yeah.
Especially in terms, obviously you might feel good for an evening, but in terms of my mood generally, I feel like it's a lot more positive now that I don't drink, because I did used to, but before
Yeah.
attempts. But yeah, just yeah, generally like my mood feels a lot more positive now that I don't.
How was so another conversation change. It kind of happens when I have these chats. As a thought just
Yeah,
popped
no,
into
that's
my
totally
head.
fine.
And so on your road to recovery, you know, after your attempted suicide, was there a point where you gradually started to feel better, and is or you know and actually I don't want to ask that question. Let's cut that out. There's another.
Yeah, sure.
What I want to ask is so you know, I think the idea of mental health is you do obviously have bad days, and you know those days you can't predict when they're going to come. And when you do have these bad days, how have you kind of learned to accept them and deal with them? Is it, you know, is that linking with your CBT, or is that, you know, is there a few things you do?
Yeah, I'll be honest, and I don't quite know how. Um, but I haven't had a bad. I can't remember the last bad day that I had.
Yeah.
It'll be over at least over 6 months ago.
Okay.
Um, so I kind of had like bad hours or bad half hours,
Yeah.
but I can find that I can problem solve and dig myself out of them a lot quicker, so that they don't spiral. My thoughts don't spiral out of control.
Yeah.
And I can kind of, I have coping mechanisms that I know I can do just subconsciously, and I think I've got them written down somewhere. If I ever did need to just remind myself of them, but
Yeah.
subconsciously I know that I can listen to music, I can go out for a run, I can call my friends, I can
Music's
watch.
brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, no, 100%. Music helps me a lot.
Do you have a
Um,
like I have a playlist that it's called uplifting melodies. When I'm not in a good state, I just slap on uplifting melodies, and honestly, mate, works like a charm every time. I feel so good.
no, I
Um,
take there's certain music that can lift you out of that place.
yeah.
I'm into like my indie music, so there's a few
Okay.
albums I
Nice.
know I can go to that um
Yeah.
that will help me out. Uh, but yeah, it's all about having those coping mechanisms. Um, and if you've got those, uh, you can. I find it so much easier just to challenge my thoughts, and
Yeah.
that's what that ultimately I feel like that's what's really turned things around for me, because I feel a bad thought coming on, and I can challenge it a lot quicker, so I can move on from it. If I start thinking, oh, you haven't done much today, you should have been more productive, then you just think, would I talk to a friend like that? And the answer is always no.
Yeah.
When you're being hard on yourself,
Yeah.
very rarely do you say to a friend, oh, you should have done better at that.
Yeah.
Very rarely. Um, so I use that phrase a lot. Would you like? Would do you talk to yourself like you talk like you talk to your friends?
Yeah.
And that helps me out a lot.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, I definitely subconsciously do that as well a bit more now. Um, a question I do have to ask though. So if there is someone, you know, watching watching this out there who is, you know, feeling particularly suicidal, what is it that you would say to them? And, you know,
There's
doesn't
a
know what
lot.
to do, and yeah, I guess you can't really summarize it, but
No, there's certain things. Um, you kind of have to take my word for it, and you have to take everyone else's word for it who's been through it, and has been in that dark place and dug themselves out of it. That throughout life, you can kind of change the person that you are.
yeah,
You can change your environment. You can change the thoughts you have. You can even change like your whole personality, really. Um, and you can just change the way that you feel about yourself and the perspective that you have on life. And maybe the crap few months that you've had, the crap couple of years that you've had, um, you can't change them. You can't change the past,
yeah,
um, but you can learn from them. You can learn about the things that make you feel crap, and you
yeah,
can implement them, um, or get rid of them and implement other things that can really help you to move forward and make the most out of like everything that life has to offer.
yeah,
I would say taking one day at a time is important.
yeah.
And even if you want to break that down further, I used to take 1 hour at a time.
Okay.
When I was in the psychiatric ward for 3 weeks after my attempts, literally just focus on an hour at a time, uh, just because my mind was all over the place.
Yeah,
And if I had that little chunk of time to focus on, then I would just focus on that rather than focusing on my thoughts.
yeah,
Speaking to yourself like you speak to a friend, that's one of the key things that I always say. um, and just the pain that someone listening to this like might be feeling at this point, it just comes down to the idea that although there's no way into another person's mind, there's no direct proof that you can get, there's
yeah,
people out there who will tell you that things can change and things will get better, and that suicide is never the answer,
yeah,
because you'll miss out on all the amazing things that will happen to you in the future.
yeah. Well, lovely put. I did kind of put you on the spot there, mate, but honestly, it sounded like you had an answer prepared. But um, honestly, one thing I do, quite interested though, and I recently saw a YouTube video actually. I can't remember his name, but there's this guy who goes around, you know, speaking about you know, his suicide attempt, and one of the things he said was the moment so I think he jumped off like the Golden Gate Bridge, and
Is it Kevin Hines?
yes, 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 yeah, um,
I only heard about him because obviously me jumping in front of a train and him jumping off Golden Gate Bridge, it's kind of, his was more extreme, but it's kind of two scenarios where it's just like, how the hell did you survive that?
yeah,
And you kind of
yeah.
both turn things around.
And yeah, spot on. And one of the things he says, and by the way, I think you should go out there and public speaking, mate, because what he does sounds like, you know, yeah. But anyway, don't know why I'm giving you life advice when my life's a mess.
No, I
I'm joking.
appreciate
But yeah, I think one of the things he said was the moment he jumped off, the moment he jumped, he wanted to live. Like he didn't, he no longer, you know, he was like, I don't want to die. And I guess, you know, the in the scheme of things, you know, jumping in front of the train, you know, it was quite, you know, it's not like a long way to go when, you know, when you jump off a
yeah.
bridge, it was quite high up. But was there a moment like, I mean, I'm sure it happened so quickly, but was there a moment in your mind where you were thinking like, what, like I've just done this, or did it just all happen so fast you didn't even think about it?
I'll be honest, I was unconscious for like half an hour afterwards, so I don't remember
Really?
much of it.
Really?
Yeah, people ask me, and I don't remember. The last thing I remember is taking my t-shirt off and taking my shoes off
Yeah,
about 5 seconds beforehand. I don't remember jumping at all. Um, I don't remember landing inside the train. I don't remember any of that.
yeah,
Um, I also wouldn't say that um, I regretted it afterwards,
no,
because I remember talking to my mum about 3 weeks later saying, I wish it had worked. I wish I wasn't here.
yeah,
Which just proves that it wasn't like a sudden switch that I
no,
was like, I'm totally fine now. It was working training my
To
mind
yeah,
to think in different ways. It wasn't like a sudden moment where it was just like, oh, I'm going to go out and live my life. It was, and I'll never be like that. There'll always be moments where it's like, oh, I can't be bothered for today. But it's all about how you cope with those, and how you learn to manage them despite them. Uh, so I wouldn't say that I regretted it straight afterwards,
yeah,
um, because ultimately I did still want to die for about a couple of months afterwards.
yeah,
Um, I felt guilty for what I put everyone through, and I did still feel like a letdown because of my A-level exams,
yeah,
and still wasn't comfortable with myself. But slowly I learned how to, and I'm grateful that I'm still here. It's an interesting one when people ask me if I regret it, because this is more to do with the mental health system.
yeah,
And the fact that I don't regret it speaks volumes about the incompetency of the UK mental health system, especially for
yeah,
young people.
yeah,
Because I told numerous professionals that I was suicidal, and I was never given CBT or any of the
yeah,
things that helped me to get better after my suicide attempts. I felt like I was only really taken seriously once I jumped in front of a train,
yeah.
which
When
is
it's too late, you know.
extremely dangerous.
Yes,
Because one, it tells people, and it's especially teenagers, that
you won't be
their
taken
feeling,
seriously.
yeah, their feelings aren't valid until they make a suicide attempt,
Yeah,
and that their feelings aren't valid, like, unless they're suicidal or they put themselves in danger. And two, it means that more people will put themselves in danger because they feel that the only way that
there's
people will
that
take
they
them
cry for
seriously
help almost.
is if they do. Exactly, yeah. Um, which, I mean, the fact I regret putting myself in danger
Yes,
100%.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I can't explain how grateful I am that I'm still here with no life-changing injuries.
yeah,
Uh, but the fact that I don't regret it entirely because of the help that it got me is tragic,
yeah.
because
It shouldn't have come down to that.
it shouldn't come down to that at all. Once you tell someone you're suicidal, that should be the point where things start to click and you're given the help you need. That's the crisis point.
Yeah,
Whereas the crisis point at the moment is the point of is when you actually make a suicide attempt. Whereas it should be, I'm suicidal. Right. Let's get you some serious help.
yeah. I mean, on that line, on that note, um, how ridiculous is this? So I've spoken to a few people about speaking counselling whilst at uni, and when I was and someone who's come on before spoke a little bit about this, but when I'd lost mum, and I didn't really know where to go to, so I kind of spoke to the uni. There was like a 2-3 week waiting list for me to be seen. Like it wasn't initial. Like it wasn't all right. Let's help him out straight away. Let's and I understand there's an abundance of students, and there isn't, it's not something that can be fixed overnight. But if someone like yourself in that position who spoke to a mental profession or at uni and says, I am suicidal, and then for them to turn around and say, that there's this month waiting list till we can be seen, but in the meantime try and do some breathing. Well,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's
It just makes you feel like your feelings aren't
that. Yeah,
valued, and the way you
yeah,
feel isn't valid. Um, yeah, which is scary. And it needs
yeah,
to change, which is another reason why I'm talking about my experiences. And it's something that I'll be writing a bit more about, and hopefully doing more to change in like the coming months
yeah.
and years.
I do want to
Uh,
say though, also, I'm gonna tag your post in the description, because honestly, mate, I feel like if whoever's listening to this does 100% need to read that article. It's incredibly eye opening, and yeah, I just think it really gives people the empathy to kind of understand what one at their lowest point in their life is really experiencing. Um,
mm,
I do want to wrap this up. I've loved this chat, mate. And I want to wrap it. I want to wrap it up on this note. And if you could say something to that boy who was on the platform, if you could say, if you could, speak to yourself on the platform, what would you sort of say?
Um, whew.
Ooh, he's ended on a hard one.
Uh, hold on, and that's a tough question. There's so many things.
Yeah.
It's a quote I've heard before, but it's important. And it goes something like, hold on for the people you'll become. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, throughout life,
I
you'll
really
change a
like
lot.
that.
Throughout life, you'll change a lot, and you won't ever be entirely the same person. Your mind will constantly change. The people around you will change. Your environment will change. Your personality will change. Your appearance will probably change quite a bit too. So killing myself at that point, that is just me at a moment in time. Whereas if I'd held on or survived as I did, now I can see that, to be honest, I'm a very different person to the person I was then. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful that I was able to survive. And I think that anyone listening to this who's feeling suicidal, their future selves will be grateful if they hold on and don't put themselves in danger.
Yeah.
Because with patience and with time and with the right support, you'll be able to dig yourself out of the dark place that you're in, if you are in a dark place,
Yeah.
and enjoy more of the good things that life has to offer.
Thank you, mate. Honestly, I've really, really enjoyed today's chat. Yeah, no, it's just, thank you again for coming on, and hopefully, I don't know, hopefully you've gotten something from it. But yeah, it's honestly, mate, it was a proper pleasure talking to you.
Yeah,
And
no, I
sorry
really
about the West Ham result.
no, honestly, I've loved it. I always get something from these
Yeah,
conversations, because it helps me to look back on. It reminds me of the things that I need to be doing to make sure that I stay healthy, and it also gives me some further ideas when I'm talking about further articles that I need to be writing,
nice.
and different avenues that I want to explore. So, and yeah, obviously, it's great just to support like your whole podcast as well, and I think it's great what you're doing too. So.
Thank you, mate. Anyway, it's been a pleasure, and yeah, looking forward to seeing the response. Sweet. See you
Yeah.
later.
I just want you to find your truth and stick to it. I know you'll be okay. I know it. From the bottom of my heart, I know it. I love you, Papa.